Hey everybody, and welcome to yet another student-produced Reading Through History knockoff video. My name is Alex Chuang, and I am a San Marino High School junior enrolled in Mr. Peter Bracconi's 2020-2021 AP US History course. And the topic of my video today is the story of the Chinese in America during the 1800s. This story essentially begins in 1848, when the Chinese, in any significant numbers, first immigrated to the US. They left China and immigrated to the US for a variety of push and pull factors. The primary push factor was overpopulation in China. In other words, a lack of available and suitable farming land in China in the early 1800s left many farmers in desolation, and thus seeking life in a new country. At the same time, excitement arose in China for travel to California because of the gold rush, one of the primary pull factors. Another pull factor for the Chinese was the Burlingham Sewer Treaty, with this treaty having been signed not long after the gold rush, creating an alliance between the US and China, and resulting in a major agreement that allowed citizens from both countries to immigrate between the two nations. Now that we've learned about both the push and pull factors that influenced the Chinese immigration, let's talk in more detail about the Chinese who immigrated to the US and what they experienced while living here. Most of the Chinese who left China and immigrated to the US immigrated to California in search of gold. Most of these immigrants were young and unskilled male bachelors, and overall not knowledgeable enough to succeed with finding gold. Thus, many of them, after they got here and found themselves unable to find gold, became railroad workers. The specific railroad that most of these Chinese went to work for was called the Pacific Railroad. Roughly 15,000 Chinese immigrants worked for this railroad as it sought to build the western portion of America's first transcontinental railroad. Though the work conditions were harsh and labor was arduous, these 15,000 Chinese immigrant transcontinental railroad workers did manage to lay down 700 miles of track from San Francisco to Promontory, Utah. However, the Chinese had to face more difficulties than just the rough terrain. While white workers were provided with meals and train cars to reside in, the Chinese had to find their own food and were forced to sleep in tents, not to mention the double pay white workers received over the Chinese. This prejudice did not stay within the workforce. The Anglo-Saxon Americans began to fear that the Chinese would not only ruin the white culture of America, but that they would also take away jobs from Americans. Soon they developed a nativist ideology, which is essentially a hatred of foreigners. Thus, many Chinese immigrants experienced anti-Chinese sentiment, with this sentiment leading to the Chinese Exclusion Act, the Foreign Miners Tax, and the Chinese Massacre. The Chinese Exclusion Act was a law passed by Congress and signed by President Chester Arthur, with this law prohibiting any immigration of the Chinese laborers to America. This act also resulted in the revisions of the aforementioned Burlingham Sewer Treaty. While it was only meant to be in place for 10 years, it ended up preventing the Chinese from immigrating to America for over 60 years. It was especially unique in the fact that it was the only law in American history that restricted an entire ethnic group from immigrating to the United States. Soon after the passage of the Chinese Exclusion Act, the California legislature doubled down on the anti-Chinese sentiment that existed at that time, with the passage of something called the Foreign Miners Tax. This law required non-US citizen miners to pay a $20 fee every month for their right to mine on California land. While it was technically implemented to all non-US citizens, in reality, the law was directed to Chinese immigrants, as most Europeans did not have to pay for it. Chinese immigrants also experienced many anti-Chinese sentiments from the people living around them. One night in Los Angeles, a fight between two Chinese gangs resulted in the accidental death of a police officer and a white bystander. Because of this, more than 500 people gathered together to kill and rob many Chinese Americans. In the end, around 18 people died that night, of which only one actually participated in the original fight. This event became known as the Chinese Massacre. The aftermath of the massacre resulted in more non-violent approaches of prejudice towards Chinese immigrants. One instance was the laundry ordinance issued in 1880 by San Francisco's Board of Supervisors, which required laundry businesses to be in stone or brick buildings instead of wood. Yik Wo, a laundry owner in the San Francisco area, operated his businesses out of a wooden building, and while he was told that he had to fix it, his application for the renovation license was declined. Taking it upon himself, he questioned other owners of wooden Chinese laundromats and discovered the discrimination the entire Chinese business community was facing. Wo kept operating his laundromat, but was eventually arrested for his violation of the ordinance. Later, he sued Peter Hopkins, the officer that arrested him, and his case went to the U.S. Supreme Court. In the case of Yik Wo versus Hopkins, the U.S. Supreme Court unanimously decided that the laundry ordinance was unlawful and in direct violation of the 14th Amendment, which stated that anyone born in the U.S. is granted equal protection under the law. Despite many Chinese laundromat owners not being U.S. citizens, the court ruled that they were still eligible for equal protection under the law. While this short-term effect was its main result, it also acted as a breaking point for the equal treatment of Chinese immigrants, helping shape the future for them. Because of situations like the Chinese Exclusion Act, the Foreign Miners Tax, the downtown LA Chinese Massacre, and the San Francisco Laundry Ordinance, it was natural that these immigrants would set up their own communities, which came to be known as Chinatowns. These Chinatowns grew over time, and eventually, when the mining and railroad working were not as popular, many owned stores in these districts, including laundromats and restaurants. These cultural clusters developed over time and continue to thrive across the country today. Overall, during this period of time from 1848 to 1898, many Chinese immigrants prospered and flourished through the development of ethnic communities and small businesses. However, others suffered miserably from the nativist idealism the American people had developed, which caused many prejudice acts and events such as the Chinese Exclusion Act, Foreign Miners Tax, downtown LA Chinese Massacre, and the San Francisco Laundry Ordinance. Bottom line, despite whatever hardships they faced, whatever successes they enjoyed, the Chinese immigrants that came to America survived through the prejudice and tough conditions, and didn't crumble under the pressure of life in a new country. Instead, they were able to maintain their culture and create their own success. Thank you for watching this video on the Chinese in America during the 1800s. We hope you learned something new, and wish you luck in your AP US History course.